What I'm going to be talking about is least restrictive environment. That's a precise legal term used in the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Essentially means that students with disabilities should be educated to the maximum extent appropriate with their non-disabled peers. In fact, both the federal law and the state law have two components of LRE that it's important to know about. One is what we call the presumption. The idea in Article 7 presumes that to the maximum extent appropriate, students with disabilities should be educated in settings with their non-disabled peers. That's kind of like where we begin. That's the baseline. All kids should be educated in general education. But with kids with disabilities, the law says to the maximum extent appropriate. And that, of course, is a very important term. And essentially what the law then goes on to say is special classes, special schooling, or other removal of students with disabilities should occur only when the severity or nature or severity of their disability is such that education, in regular education, even with the use of supplementary aids and services, cannot be achieved satisfactorily. And then Article 7 says the case conference committee determines the placement in which a student will receive services. So clearly the law is saying these are the folks in Indiana who need to determine the placement. The federal government's definition is not as clear on who should determine placement. They just talk about a placement team. But Article 7 says the case conference committee. Placement must be based on a student's IEP. It must be reviewed at least annually. And it should be, education should be in the school that the student would attend if they were not disabled, unless the IEP requires some other arrangement. The next part of both federal and state law say that each addresses what is called the continuum of alternative placements. That each public agency must ensure that a continuum of alternative placements is available to meet the needs of the students with disabilities. If you move a kid out of the general classroom to a more restrictive setting, you have to justify that in the IEP. You have to kind of basically clearly state the reasons that that was necessary. There's nothing, no court has ever said that all students need to be first educated in the general classroom before moving to more restrictive settings, but it's not a bad idea, you know, to educate kids in the general classroom, try and deliver supplementary aids and services, and then only move them up when you think it's absolutely necessary to provide an appropriate education.